Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. And now, with everything regarding COVID 19 having such a massive impact on everyone and being labeled as a pandemic and a travesty, I think it's only fair that we talk about another travesty, and that is the WWE's treatment of the Revival. On this episode of The Rise and Fall, we cover the Revival. So the Revival, in case you couldn't get it from their gimmick, was meant to be a throwback to old school tag team wrestling, a revival of sorts. And they started off big in NXT. And although they were originally called the Mechanics, which is nowhere near the impressive name as the Revival, they were slowly starting to get noticed by their incredible wrestling skill and the mad chemistry that Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder have with each other. The Revival also came to NXT at pretty much the perfect time, since this is what many considered to be NXT's golden era, because at the time NXT had so much great talent like Finn Balor, Kevin Owens, Sasha Banks, as well as Enzo and Cass, so the talent pool cut really deep at NXT during this time. In only a short matter of time, the Revival would end up winning the NXT Tag Team Championships by beating the Vaudevillains on an episode of NXT. The Revival earned their popularity by having classic tag team matches with Enzo and Cass as well as American Alpha. They were and are essentially tag team fundamentalists. Although they were on top of the tag team division, they would end up losing the titles to American Alpha, but quickly regain the tag team titles back, and they would be the first tag team in NXT history to become two-time NXT Tag Team Champions. The Revival holds the record for the third longest NXT title reign in history, with a total of over 326 days before they would end up losing the titles to DIY in a phenomenal tag team match. Shortly after losing the titles, the Revival made their move up to the main roster on the night after WrestleMania 3, where they ended up beating the New Day in their first match on the main roster. Beating multiple tag team champions, the New Day was the way to debut the Revival as top guys indeed. However, the injury bug would bite Dash Wilder, as 11 days later he would end up suffering a fractured jaw at a live event and would be out for 8 weeks, meaning that also Scott Dawson would be out for 8 weeks since they are a tag team. They would return on the July 10th, 2017 episode of Raw, but once again, the injury bug would strike again, as this time Scott Dawson, he ruptured his bicep and the tag team would be out for a longer period of time, this time for 5 months. So far, the main roster debut of the Revival was not going anywhere near as good as their NXT run. The Revival finally returned on the December 18th, 2017 edition of Raw, where they would end up beating Rhino and Heath Slater, which put them on the right track with them beating former SmackDown Live Tag Team Champions. However, 2018 rolled around, and after doing some solid work, the Revival finally got their long overdue tag team title shot at SummerSlam 2018. And I and a lot of people were thinking that this is going to be their big moment. And just because, and I'm pretty sure this is the reason why, just because Vince McMahon likes to troll people, the B team would end up retaining their tag team titles in that match. The B team beat one of the best fundamental tag team around. So naturally, it came to no one's surprise when soon afterwards the Revival asked for their release from the company. And no doubt they probably would have gotten their release had it not been for the rise of an all-elite promotion. It made WWE scared to lose talent that could make a bigger name for themselves outside of WWE, like how Cody Rhodes was able to do for himself once he left the Big E. After failing to capture the tag titles, they would end up feuding with the Lucha House Party, where they would constantly lose over and over again, and they would lose in such convincing fashion and sometimes in under 5 minutes. Not too long after the feud, they would also end up getting I don't want to use the word buried, but what else can you say? They ended up getting buried by the Clique on the Raw 25th anniversary show, where each member of the Clique, they performed each of their finishers before tossing them out of the ring to the Revival. And look, I get it. Nostalgia is a big thing, and it's something that sells. It's something that you can look back on and be happy, look back on the past. But it should not come at the expense of new and upcoming talent. Finally, in 2019, the Revival won the Raw Tag Team titles against Bobby Roode and Chad Gable, and it only took them 2 years, a few injuries, and a whole lot of losses, but by God, they finally did it. They would only hold on to the title for 55 days before losing them to Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder at WrestleMania 35. And as opposed to the internet being angry, they were more or less sad at what they were seeing and sad at what the talent was going through. They were also disappointed at Vince McMahon for not seeing the talent that these two men really have. They would regain the Raw Tag Team titles, but only hold on to them for 49 days before losing them again. And at this point, they weren't having the classic tag team matches like they were having back in NXT. And although they were wrestling on stages like SummerSlam and WrestleMania, they would usually be wrestling on the pre-show and not on the main card at all. The Revival would move over to SmackDown, and they would become the SmackDown Tag Team Champions. And once they did that, they would become the first team in history to hold the NXT, Raw, and SmackDown Tag Team titles, which is honestly quite the accomplishment, and to my knowledge, no one else has been able to do that yet. Of course, they wouldn't hold on to the tag team titles for long, as they would lose it to the New Day, and they currently wrestle on SmackDown with nothing for them to really do, and that is currently where the Revival resides. Ultimately, what affected the Revival the most was the fact that they got injured at the worst possible time, and once they got back from injury, the spotlight was ultimately taken away from them. Or Vince does what he usually does when he doesn't understand a talent, and that's to give up on them. The Revival came in hot, and everyone was excited to see how they would do on the main roster. But after losing constantly, the shine rubbed off a long time ago. And I doubt that Vince is gonna suddenly have a change of heart and make them multiple World Tag Team Champions. Once again, the COVID virus is, rampant among us, and once it's gone, the only question to ask them is whether they are going to stay with WWE, or will they be making an elite choice in their next promotion.